The church was filled with the low hum of whispered condolences, the scent of lilies, and the weight of a grief that pressed down on every heart. My father's casket stood at the front, draped in white, surrounded by faces both familiar and distant. Some wept openly. Others sat stiff and silent, eyes red but dry. I could feel the tension in the air, a current of unspoken words and old wounds that had never quite healed. My siblings sat beside me, each lost in their own thoughts, their expressions masks I couldn't read. The service was somber, the eulogies heartfelt but careful, as if everyone was afraid to say too much. When the final hymn faded, the lawyer, Mr. Hargrove, stood and cleared his throat. He held a small remote in his trembling hand. "Before we conclude, your father left a message he wanted you all to see," he announced, his voice barely above a whisper. A screen flickered to life at the front of the room. The image of my father appeared, gaunt but resolute, his eyes burning with an intensity one hadn't seen in years. The room fell utterly silent. He looked straight into the camera, and then into our souls. "If you're watching this," he began, his voice steady, "someone in this room killed me for money." A collective gasp rippled through the mourners. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could see my mother's hand fly to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. My brother shifted uncomfortably, while my sister's face drained of color. The lawyer paused the video, his own face ashen. For a moment, no one moved. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of someone's stifled sob. I looked around at the faces I'd known my whole life, searching for answers, for guilt, for anything that might explain what we'd just heard. But all I saw was shock, fear, and the dawning realization that nothing about this day would be what we expected. But no one was prepared for what Dad would say next. Looking back, it's hard to pinpoint the exact moment when our family began to unravel. Maybe it was the day Dad first stumbled on the stairs, or the way his hands started to tremble when he thought no one was watching. At first, we all pretended it was nothing, just age catching up, nothing to worry about. But denial is a fragile shield, and it didn't take long for the truth to break through. Dad was sick, and the illness moved faster than any of us were willing to admit. As the eldest, I tried to hold everyone together. I became the unofficial mediator, the one who fielded frantic phone calls and tried to smooth over arguments before they exploded. My brother, Mark, was always quick to anger, convinced that Dad favored me, that I was the golden child. My sister, Emily, wore her resentment like armor, bristling at every perceived slight, every decision that didn't go her way. Mom did her best to keep the peace, but I could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the way she flinched at raised voices and slammed doors. Money was the silent storm cloud that hovered over every conversation. Dad had built a successful business from nothing, and as his health declined, the question of what would happen to it and to his estate became impossible to ignore. Mark wanted to take over, insisting he was the only one who understood the business. Emily argued that she deserved her share, that she'd sacrificed just as much as anyone. I tried to stay above the fray, but even I wasn't immune to the anxiety that came with not knowing what the future held. Despite the tension, there were moments of real love. I remember sitting with Dad on the porch, watching the sun set as he told me stories from his childhood. He'd squeeze my hand and remind me that family was everything, that no amount of money could ever replace the people you love. I wanted to believe him, to hold on to the hope that we'd find our way back to each other. But as the weeks passed and his condition worsened, the cracks in our family grew wider. The last few months were a blur of hospital visits, whispered arguments, and sleepless nights. Dad tried to keep us united, but his strength was fading. I saw the fear in his eyes, the worry that we'd tear each other apart once he was gone. He called us together one night, his voice barely more than a whisper, and begged us to look out for one another. We promised we would, but even then, I could feel the weight of secrets pressing down on us. There were things we didn't talk about, old betrayals, hidden debts, choices made in desperation. I caught Mark sneaking into Dad's study late at night, rifling through papers he claimed were just business. Emily started spending more time away from home, returning with stories that didn't quite add up. Mom withdrew into herself, her grief already beginning to take root. I tried to keep the peace, to remind everyone of what we stood to lose. But my words felt hollow. On the outside, we presented a united front. We smiled for neighbors, thanked friends for their condolences, and pretended that we were coping. But behind closed doors, the fractures deepened. Every conversation seemed to circle back to money, to who deserved what, to who had sacrificed the most. I wanted to believe that love would win out, that we'd find a way to honor Dad's memory together. But as I sat in that church listening to his voice echo from beyond the grave, I realized how wrong I'd been. I always thought we'd come together in the end, but I was wrong. The silence in the church was suffocating as Mr. Hargrove pressed play again. My father's image flickered back onto the screen, his voice steady but edged with something I'd never heard before: fear. If you're watching this, it means I'm gone. And it wasn't by accident. I know someone close to me wanted more than I was willing to give. I know about the depths, the secrets, the lies. I know what you're capable of. His gaze seemed to pierce through the screen, searching each of us for a reaction. A ripple of panic moved through the pews. Mark's jaw clenched, his eyes darting to Emily, who sat frozen, her hands gripping the edge of her seat. Mom's face was ashen, her lips pressed into a thin line. I felt my own heart racing, a cold sweat prickling at the back of my neck. Dad's words hung in the air, impossible to ignore. The video continued, my father naming possible motives: money, resentment, desperation. He spoke of recent arguments, of trust broken and promises betrayed. I've left behind the truth, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. If you care about justice, you'll find it. But be careful. Someone here will do anything to keep their secret buried. As the video ended, chaos erupted. Mark shot to his feet, his voice shaking with anger. This is insane. Are we really supposed to believe someone here killed Dad? Emily's eyes filled with tears, but there was something else there too. Fear, maybe, or guilt. Mom looked between us, her hands trembling in her lap. Mr. Hargrove cleared his throat, trying to regain control. There's more, he said, his voice grave. Your father's will is being contested. There are irregularities. The authorities have been notified, and the police will be conducting an investigation. The words hit like a physical blow. Suddenly, every glance felt loaded, every memory suspect. The police arrived quietly, speaking in low voices with the lawyer. I watched as they took notes, their eyes scanning the room, assessing each of us. The family that had once gathered for birthdays and holidays now sat divided by suspicion. Mark accused Emily of manipulating Dad in his final days. Emily fired back, reminding him of his gambling debts and late-night visits to Dad's study. Even Mom wasn't spared. Mark questioned her loyalty, while Emily hinted at secrets she'd kept from us all. I tried to keep my voice steady, to remind everyone that Dad deserved better than this, but my words fell on deaf ears. The funeral had become a battleground, each of us desperate to defend ourselves, to cast blame anywhere but inward. I could feel the walls closing in, the weight of secrets pressing down on us all. But the real shock was yet to come. Dad left clues, and someone was desperate to keep them hidden. In the days that followed, the house felt colder, haunted not just by loss but by suspicion. I couldn't sleep, replaying Dad's words over and over, searching for meaning in every syllable. The police came and went, asking questions that made us all squirm. But I knew if I wanted answers, I'd have to find them myself. I started with Dad's study, the room he'd always kept locked. The scent of his cologne lingered in the air, mingling with the sharp tang of old paper. I rifled through drawers, finding nothing but business ledgers and family photos, until I stumbled on a small, battered notebook wedged behind a row of books. Inside, Dad had scribbled notes in his familiar, looping script. Some were mundane, reminders, phone numbers, but others were more cryptic. Mark, late again. Emily, missing jewelry. Trust no one. My heart pounded as I read, realizing Dad had been watching us, too. I confronted Mark first, catching him in the garage, pacing and muttering to himself. What were you doing in Dad's study those nights? I demanded. He bristled, eyes flashing. Trying to save the business. You think I wanted this? I was desperate, okay. The debts were piling up and Dad wouldn't help. His voice cracked, and for a moment, I saw the scared little brother I used to protect. But then he turned cold. Don't act like you're above it all. You have secrets too. Emily was harder to pin down. She'd been avoiding everyone, locking herself in her room, or disappearing for hours. When I finally cornered her in the kitchen, she looked exhausted, her eyes rimmed red. I didn't kill him, she whispered before I could even ask. But I did things I'm not proud of. I borrowed money from Dad, more than once. I lied about where it went. But I swear I never wanted this. Her confession left me reeling, but it didn't feel like the whole truth. Flashbacks began to color my memories. I remembered the night Dad called us all together, his voice trembling as he begged us to stay united. I remembered Mark storming out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. I remembered Emily's sudden trips, her evasive answers. Even Mom seemed different now, quieter, more withdrawn. I caught her burning papers in the fireplace one night, her face illuminated by the flames. When I asked what she was doing, she just shook her head. Some things are better left in the past, she said, her voice barely audible. The more I uncovered, the less I understood. Every answer led to more questions. Why had Dad been so afraid? What was he protecting us from, or protecting himself from? I found receipts for large withdrawals from his accounts, but no record of where the money went. I found letters from someone named A, threatening to expose a secret if Dad didn't pay up. I found a photograph of Dad with a woman I didn't recognize, tucked inside a book of poetry he'd always kept by his bed. Tensions in the house reached a breaking point. Mark and Emily barely spoke, except to hurl accusations. Mom retreated further, refusing to answer the police's questions. I felt like I was losing my grip, the family I'd tried so hard to hold together slipping through my fingers. Then late one night, I found it, a small, locked box hidden beneath a loose floorboard in Dad's study. The key was taped to the back of his favorite painting, a place only someone who truly knew him would think to look. My hand shook as I opened the box. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in Dad's handwriting. It was a riddle, referencing a place only the family would know. The old oak tree in the backyard, where we'd buried a time capsule as kids. I realized Dad had left us a trail, clues meant to lead us to the truth. But as I stared at the note, I felt a chill run down my spine. Someone else had been searching, too. I found muddy footprints by the back door, and the feeling of being watched grew stronger with each passing day. I knew I was getting close, but I also knew that whoever had the most to lose would do anything to stop me. Every answer led to more questions, and someone was watching my every move. I waited until the house was quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavy with secrets. Mark was in the den, nursing a drink, his eyes fixed on nothing. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, the note from Dad's box clutched in my hand. "We need to talk," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. He looked up, his expression wary, as if he'd been expecting this. I laid out everything I'd found, the notebook, the threats, the missing money, the riddle pointing to the old oak tree. Mark's face twisted with anger. "You think I killed him? After everything I did for this family?" His voice rose, raw and desperate. Dad was going to cut me out. He said I was a liability. But I would never. He stopped, fist clenched, jaw trembling. "You don't know what it's like to be the disappointment." The argument escalated, voices echoing through the empty house. I accused him of lying, of hiding things from all of us. He fired back, dredging up old wounds, blaming me for always being the favorite, for never understanding the pressure he felt. The pain in his eyes was real, but so was the rage. For a moment, I thought he might hit me. Instead, he stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. I stood there, heart pounding, wondering if I'd just pushed my brother over the edge. But before I could process what had happened, Emily appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "You need to see this," she whispered, holding out her phone. On the screen was a video, another message from Dad, hidden in a folder labeled "For the Truth." Dad's face appeared, more vulnerable this time. "If you found this, you're closer than I ever got." I was being blackmailed. Someone threatened to expose a secret from my past, something I thought was buried. I tried to protect you all, but I made mistakes. The The person who did this isn't who you think. Look for the red envelope in my desk. Trust your instincts. My mind raced. The red envelope. I tore through Dad's desk, finally finding it taped beneath the bottom drawer. Inside was a letter and a photograph, the same woman from the poetry book, standing with Dad and Mom. The letter explained everything. Years ago, Dad had an affair and the woman had a child. He'd been sending money to support them, afraid the truth would destroy our family. Someone had found out and used it against him. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. The motive wasn't just money, it was revenge, fueled by betrayal and secrets. I thought I knew who to trust, but Dad's final words changed everything. The next morning, I called everyone into the living room. The air was thick with dread, each of us carrying the weight of sleepless nights and unspoken fears. Mark slouched in a corner, arms crossed defensively. Emily hovered by the window, her eyes darting between us. Mom sat rigid on the sofa, her hands folded tightly in her lap. I could feel my own heart pounding, but I knew there was no turning back. I laid the red envelope on the coffee table, the photograph and letter inside for all to see. Dad was being blackmailed. I began, my voice trembling but clear. He had a secret, an affair, a child he supported in secret. Someone found out and used it against him. That's why the money was missing, why he was so afraid. I looked at each of them, searching for a flicker of recognition, a crack in the mask. Mark's face twisted in confusion and anger. You think I did this? I didn't even know about any of this. Emily shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. I swear, I never wanted to hurt anyone. I just needed help. I thought if I could get my share early, I could fix everything. Mom's silence was the loudest of all. She stared at the photograph, her lips trembling. I pressed on, revealing the threats, the hidden notebook, the second video. Dad left clues because he knew someone close to him was desperate enough to do anything. He wanted us to find the truth, even if it destroyed us. I turned to Mom, my voice barely above a whisper. You knew about the affair, didn't you? She closed her eyes, a single tear slipping down her cheek. I found out years ago. I forgave him, or at least I tried. But when the letters started coming, I thought it was just someone trying to hurt us. I never imagined. Her voice broke, and for a moment I saw the woman she used to be, strong, loving, but now so very tired. But then Emily stepped forward, her hands shaking. It was me, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I found the letters. I was angry at Dad, at all of you. I thought if I threatened him, he'd finally see me, finally give me what I deserved. But I never meant for him to die. I just wanted him to be scared, to know what it felt like to be powerless. The room went silent, the confession hanging in the air like a storm about to break. Mark stared at her in disbelief, his anger dissolving into shock. Mom covered her mouth, sobbing quietly. I felt a strange mix of relief and heartbreak. The truth was out, but it didn't feel like victory. Emily collapsed onto the floor, her body racked with sobs. I didn't poison him. I swear. I just sent the letters. I just wanted him to pay attention to me. The police, who had been waiting outside, entered quietly. I handed them the evidence, my hands shaking. Emily didn't resist as they led her away, her eyes pleading for forgiveness none of us were ready to give. We sat in stunned silence, the family we once were shattered beyond recognition. The truth had come out, but the damage was done. Dad's secrets, our resentments, the choices we made in anger and fear. They had all led us here, to this moment of reckoning. As the police car pulled away, I looked at Mark and Mom, searching for something to hold onto. We were broken, but maybe, just maybe, the truth could be the first step toward healing. Or maybe it was just another wound, one more scar to carry. But even as the truth came out, the damage was done. The days that followed felt strangely empty, as if the house itself was holding its breath. The police visits stopped, the neighbors' whispers faded. But the silence inside our home was heavier than ever. Mark barely spoke, spending his time in the garage, fixing things that didn't need fixing. Mom moved through the rooms like a ghost, her grief now mingled with guilt. I tried to keep busy, sorting through Dad's belongings, but every photograph, every note, was a reminder of what we'd lost and what we'd done to each other. I thought about Dad's legacy, the lessons he tried to teach us about family and forgiveness. He built everything from nothing, but in the end, it was the things we couldn't see: resentment, jealousy, secrets that tore us apart. I wondered if he knew how fragile we really were, or if he believed, even in his final days, that love would be enough to hold us together. We started talking again, slowly, cautiously. Mark apologized for his anger, for the things he'd said in the heat of the moment. Mom tried to explain her silence, her need to protect us from the truth, even as it destroyed us. We shared memories of Dad, laughing and crying in equal measure, searching for comfort in the stories we told. But some wounds never heal. Emily's absence was a constant ache, a reminder of how far we'd fallen. I visited her once, sitting across from her in a sterile room, searching her face for the sister I used to know. She cried, and I cried with her, but forgiveness felt impossibly far away. We thought the nightmare was over, but the scars remained, a silent promise that we would never forget what happened or how close we came to losing everything. A year later, I found myself standing at Dad's grave, the autumn wind tugging at my coat. The headstone was simple, just his name and the dates, but I brought fresh flowers and sat for a while, letting the quiet settle around me. So much had changed, and yet, in this place, I felt closer to him than I had in months. I thought about everything we'd been through, the secrets, the betrayals, the pain that nearly destroyed us. But I also remembered the moments of love, the laughter, the lessons Dad tried so hard to teach us. I realize now that the truth, as painful as it was, had set us free. We could never go back to the way things were, but we could choose to move forward, to rebuild, to forgive. As I stood to leave, I whispered a promise to Dad, to honor his memory not with money or possessions, but with honesty and love. Dad's last gift wasn't money, it was the truth. And in the end, that was what saved us.